Welcome to JS on Politics, where we take a look at what's happening in the politics here in what is apparently our former battleground state of Wisconsin. I'm your host, Greg Borowski, and here's a look at what's ahead on today's show. There are new polling numbers out, and they're good for Hillary Clinton, but do they also mean Wisconsin's days as a battleground state are numbered? Meanwhile, Russ Feingold continues to lead Ron Johnson in the U.S. Senate race. We'll talk about that and take a look at what Tuesday's results mean for the fall. We'll also give you a look at our winners and losers of the week, and as always, take some viewer questions. But first, we'll start at the very beginning, and that's the presidential race with this tape segment looking at the results from the polls that came out yesterday. We're joined now by Craig Gilbert, our Washington bureau chief, to talk about the presidential race and the latest poll numbers from the Marquette University Law School Poll. So let's start with those numbers here in the matchup between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. When you look at registered voters, Hillary Clinton is leading 46% to 36%, and she has an even higher margin when you go to the likely voters, where she's leading 52% to 37%, which is a 15 percentage point gap. Craig, so when Charles Franklin looked at that, his reaction was basically, wow. What's your sense of where that race stands, or what's really driving the increase in numbers for Hillary Clinton?
So this, to a big extent, just reflects Donald Trump's tumble in the race nationally. I mean, his deficit has opened up in the national polls from an average of just 1 or 2 points to 7, 8, 9 points. So he's falling in all the battlegrounds. Wisconsin is always going to be tough for him, but it's totally out of reach in a race where he has an 8-point deficit nationally. So nothing is going to change here, and this state won't be in play until he fixes his national campaign. And even then, it'll be a challenge because he's had a history of struggling in this state.
Yeah, well, let's look at that perspective now in the favorable and unfavorable ratings, where the numbers, for Hillary Clinton, it's not a good record, on its own, but compare him to Donald Trump. So Hillary Clinton has 43% favorable, 53% unfavorable. Donald Trump, 27% favorable, 65% unfavorable. Have there been any changes in this regard, Craig, or have that also been holding kind of steady?
So Donald Trump's numbers are a little bit worse than they were before, but they're in the ballpark. I mean, the real change is on the Clinton side. I mean, she had been stuck at 38% favorability all year. Suddenly she's up to 43% after her convention. That may not be a lasting change, but I think it's a significant uptick. Interestingly, Donald Trump, his numbers tumbled a little bit. He lost about 6 points on his favorability rating among Republican voters in Wisconsin. This poll was taken right around the time he snubbed Paul Ryan, and there was a rift that they tried to heal last week, or that Trump tried to heal when he was in Green Bay last week. But it did hurt him in his own party. And if you look at partisan voters, Trump is not commanding the same degree of loyalty among Republican voters against Clinton as Clinton is among Democratic voters against Trump. That's a big problem for Trump.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the campaign here in the state. So last week, Donald Trump was in Wisconsin. His running mate, Mike Pence, is in Wisconsin today and in Milwaukee tonight. They're behaving as if it's a winnable place, or at least one worth investing their time in. What is it? I mean, at a margin of this size?
Not when the race is 8 points nationally. It's not in play. The real question is, will Wisconsin be in play if it's a 1 or 2 point race nationally? And I think that's still an open question. I mean, like I said, Trump, this state has been a heavy lift for him. It seems like they've decided that Mike Pence is their designated kind of Midwestern candidate, and so they're sending him to places like Wisconsin and Iowa and Michigan. Sort of makes sense, given that he's from Indiana and given that Trump has struggled in this state. He's clashed with Republicans. He's got high negatives. So that's one way to play it, but it's a tall lift and a heavy climb for Trump. It was going to be that way all along in a state like Wisconsin. But until he can break through and improve his numbers, first in his own party, and then among groups like independents and moderates, and do a little bit better with women and younger voters than he's doing, he's won't be in the game.
Yeah, well, let's talk about whether there's an opportunity there for him to sort of write that campaign in the conventional sense that we all think of it. He's spent, every week there's this pattern of, a bellicose kind of statement that Mike Pence or someone will walk back or he'll be criticized for. The most recent thing this week, he Donald Trump unveils his economic plan in Detroit, and then immediately there's this, controversy over statements that some took as suggesting the Second Amendment supporters should take action of a violent sort against Hillary Clinton. Do you see any optimism, if you're a Republican, that Donald Trump is going to, fix this sort of perpetual campaign problem?
Yeah, so we've heard over and over again talk of a pivot for Donald Trump, a pivot to a more presidential candidate, to a softer tone. It's never stuck. It's never really happened. I mean, there were moments earlier in this campaign where Donald Trump just flatly ridiculed the idea that he needed to become more presidential. I think he may feel a little bit more chastised now, and maybe he has more incentive given his tumble in the polls to try to become a different kind of candidate, but that's really doesn't seem to be who he is. I mean, he's been this Donald Trump, the kind of shoot from the hip, over the top, adversarial, slashing candidate throughout this race. The problem is that, for a lot of voters who are in the shrinking middle in American politics, that's a turnoff. And I'm not sure what he can do to address that. I mean, the best thing he has going for him, or he's had going for them, is the fact that he's running against a weak Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, who also has high negative.
All right, well, we'll leave our discussion there for today, and we'll be back in future weeks with more on the presidential race. Thanks for joining us, Craig.
Great to be with you.
All right, we're joined now by Dan Bice, our Watchdog columnist, Mary Spicuzza, one of our political reporters. So let me ask you guys, pretend for a moment you're Donald Trump. You're this far behind in Wisconsin. What do you do besides maybe reach for your phone to tweet or berate me because it's instinctual? But what do you do to get some traction here in Wisconsin?
Disappear. That would probably help because, he was actually here when they were polling, and his numbers went down as a result of that. Probably quit attacking leaders of the Republican Party here. That would probably help as well. What else?
Yeah, I think, stop attacking Paul Ryan is probably a good move. It's interesting that he tried to pivot and focus on policies and issues and then dropped in the Second Amendment people comment, which, again, stirred up the whole controversy. So I don't know that he can stop doing what he's doing because he's basically being Donald Trump. Maybe rein it in a bit.
I did think there was one small thing in the poll that was good news for him, very, very small, and you have to look for it, and that is that currently there are 14% of Republicans who say they wouldn't vote for him under any circumstance, which normally you would say is a bad thing, but there is room for him to grow. There's not really that room for Hillary Clinton to grow. If he can convert those 14% of Republicans to come over to his side, and that number is actually smaller than I thought it was. I was thinking that it would be a higher percentage, but right now, 79% of Republicans in the state say they will vote for him this fall. But he's got this other group of Republicans who are not committed yet. The thing is, what does he do to get those people, the never-Trumpers, to come over to his side? Is it as the race gets closer and closer, those people will get desperate and vote for him? I mean, I think that's a possibility.
Yeah, it seems like he doesn't have a love-hate relationship as much as a tolerate-hate relationship with the people in the party, that they, it's like it shifts. He gets a little more steady, then he comes back with a statement, and they have to.
He just can't help himself.
It's hard for him to build that.
I mean, it's sort of what draws people to him in the first place is the fact that he is provocative and sometimes funny and
says what he thinks.
He thinks. But those are all work against him when he says what he thinks, or he says something that he thinks might be a little bit funny, but is actually not something that someone running for president should do.
Well, are the dynamics for him here worse than other battleground states when you look at how he's tangled with Paul Ryan and Scott Walker, and there's a lot less seemingly, or a lot more institutional pushback against him within the Republican Party?
I don't think he ever really had much traction here. I mean, Green Bay, Green Bay, pockets of up north too, but certainly not in Charlie Sykes' territory of the WOW counties down here. I don't think he's really had much of a fan base, and he hasn't done much to win people over, especially with the recent.
So he lost the state by double digits in April, and his numbers are worse now than they were then. So, but the one way for us to tell whether Wisconsin's still a battleground state or not, will be obvious, and that is, do the candidates continue to show up? We have Mike Pence who's here today, but will this continue?
Right. Well, we did had Tim Kaine last week. We had Donald Trump. Hillary Clinton was going to come with President Obama. Before that, news canceled that event. So, is it? Do you think it is do the Democrats view it as a battleground state?
I think it would be early. I mean, that poll certainly was not good news for Republicans that Hillary is leading in double digits and with likely voters was at 15%. But I think it would be a little early to say.
There's going to be an ebb and flow to this race. I mean, we're journalists, so we like to be first on things and to declare the race is over now. But it's not over now. I think. As I said, I think he does have a little bit of room to grow, but the thing is, he's not been popular in the state from the outset.
Yeah. Do you think there are any problems, though, when the Democrats see a poll like this and the other battleground polls that they're getting potentially a little overconfident on this thing, that it is still a long time till November, right?
Yeah, I think they could get overconfident, and they've certainly flubbed elections here in Wisconsin before. But I do think, obviously Governor Walker has won, as he likes to say, 3 times in almost as many years, and I think that they realize that there's a strong Republican turnout here.
I think they need to realize that Hillary Clinton is not Barack Obama. Barack Obama is very popular here and has run very strongly here. She's never run very strongly here. Obama beat her by, it was like 18 points back in 2008.
Back before Bernie beat her here.
Right. So she's not an incredibly popular figure here either. So, I mean, that has to give some hope to the Republicans, and it has to make Democrats somewhat leery. They have to remember that. So, I mean, the thing is, I would not be surprised if there is a flurry of appearances by Democrats to try to write off this state right away, to get her numbers up and to give her an even more sizable lead than what she has.
All right. Well, we'll leave that discussion there and turn now to what's really the other top race on the ticket this fall, which is the U.S. Senate race. We'll go to a segment on that right now. We're joined now by Bill Glauber, who's been covering the U.S. Senate race for us. And let's take a look first off at the poll numbers on that race from the Marquette University Law School Poll. In that race, we have Russ Feingold among registered voters leading 49% to 43%. The margin gets a little bit wider when you look at likely voters, 53% to 42%. So, Bill, in your story this morning, you say that the good news for Ron Johnson is he's doing better than Donald Trump. But that's
Bad
not so
news
great.
is he's still behind Russ Feingold, and it's been this way throughout the campaign. It's a little bit edged out a little bit more in favor of Feingold, especially among likely voters. And so the Feingold campaign has to be feeling pretty good right now. The Johnson campaign, they're in for a scrap.
Yeah, well, looking deeper into those numbers, where is that support coming from? Is Ron Johnson doing better among any particular group, or has he just sort of been holding steady?
He's been holding steady. One thing that changed slightly in this poll is he now has a lead among independent voters, so he can take away some good news from that. Feingold remains very strong among the Democratic base.
Yeah. To what degree do you feel that the Donald Trump factor is sort of holding down Ron Johnson's numbers, or is it more that people still don't know Ron Johnson after almost 6 years?
It's a little bit of both. 31% of people don't have enough knowledge about Johnson to have an opinion. And, it appears that Trump is holding back Republicans in the state, especially in that Senate race. They're really having difficulty getting a lot of support for Trump. Eventually, you figure the Republican base is going to come home. But if you have to spend time courting the Republican base, that's time that you're not spending courting independent voters.
Yeah, we're still seeing in this race a lot of money from outside groups on both sides. So they clearly feel there's something worth investing in for either to defend their guy or to boost them a little bit, hurt the other guy. What do you think?
Yeah,
I think
I think it will continue. A Koch brothers group is going to come back into the state. It'll be interesting to see what the Chamber of Commerce does going into the fall. They're big backers of Senator Ron Johnson, and the Johnson campaign needs that third-party support in a big way.
All right, so looking ahead, it's still August, summer, doldrums of summer, right? So come September, 1 month from now, and the next poll comes out, if Ron Johnson's here, is that when he gets worried? Is he worried now? What should his worry level be?
I think he's been worried all along. He's known all along that the headwinds are against him, that he faces an uphill battle in this race. It's just not a great year for Republicans running for the U.S. Senate. There were a lot of them who were going to be challenged this year. And, Johnson is in a presidential year as a Republican. in a state that leans presidential in presidential years. So that leans Democratic. So it's just a tough year for Johnson, just as in 2 years' time, Tammy Baldwin would face an uphill fight as she tries to retain her seat in an off-year election, which, in the recent past has favored Republicans.
All right, well, we'll leave our discussion there for today, and I'll have more in future weeks from you, Bill, on the U.S. Senate race. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, we're back now with Dan and Mary. Let's talk a little bit about Tuesday's election results. This is a primary in the middle of summer, August. Not a lot of turnout, not a lot of attention, but some significant races. What was the theme of the night, Dan?
It was landslide Tuesday. Not much excitement that night, actually, even though we built it up and thought there were a lot of super competitive races. Most of the incumbents in general ended up winning, as you might expect, because of the low turnout. And the races were a lot, the gaps in the races were much larger than we expected, starting with Paul Ryan, who wins big, John Chisholm, who wins big, Lena Taylor, who wins big in a race that all of us thought was going to be a close race. LaTanya Johnson wins a Senate seat big. So that was the theme for the night.
I think Paul Ryan squeaked by with 68% ahead. Right?
Well, what was did the folks who were backing Paul Nealon just completely overestimate frustration with Paul Ryan, or misread the district, or what do you think happened?
I don't really
Or they've never been to the district.
Or they've never been to Wisconsin. I think that there were a lot of people from outside Wisconsin who have had issues with Paul Ryan, either as speaker or his relationship with Trump, and they saw Paul Nealon as their way to get revenge, essentially. So the Sarah Palins came in, the Ann Coulters came in, and I don't really think that many of us actually thought Paul Ryan was going to lose, or even that it would be close. Paul Nealon was trying to kind of ride the Trump train, businessman, critical of trade agreements, critical of immigration policy, but as Trump has not done well in Wisconsin, Paul Nealon did even worse in Wisconsin.
And Nealon tried to run as a mini Trump in a state where Trump is not popular, so that didn't work.
Yeah, he ran into kind of a buzzsaw too with talk radio, didn't he, and others in terms of criticizing his candidacy
Yeah, and I think the thing that has struck me anytime I've been in Janesville reporting on Paul Ryan is partly how many people actually seem to like him, which is not always very common, but also how many people know him. Like, people would show me photos of them together. He'd come into their restaurant, come into their coffee shop. He spends weekends there.
He's there.
Nealon did not
come across as a very likable guy.
Known. I don't think a lot of people in the district know him.
I spent most of my night on Tuesday night, because there were so many landslides, trying to figure out if Paul Nealon or convicted felon Gary George, who was running against Gwen Moore, which one would get a higher percentage of the vote. And in the end, Paul Nealon gets 16% of the vote in his district. Gary George got 15%. So to put it in context.
We'll see if that makes him your winner of the distorted way. Let's talk a little bit about the fall now and some of the matchups, because they're set now after the primary on Tuesday, and specifically the congressional race that's open up in the Green Bay area. What do you see happening up there?
We have actually some good races from the top. You mentioned the Senate race with Feingold and Johnson, which, even though Johnson's been running behind the whole time, that's going to be competitive. Then you have the 8th Congressional District, which is Mike Gallagher against Tom Nelson. Mike Gallagher ran against Frank Lassay, and that was another one where we thought it might be close. And Gallagher, who's relatively new to politics in Wisconsin, relatively new to Wisconsin in general, but he won by 40-some points over Frank Lassay, a senator who's been around for a long, long time.
And he certainly seemed to have institutional support. As soon as he won, Paul Ryan fired off an endorsement. Scott Walker fired off an endorsement.
He has connections to Walker, and so the establishment will be behind him. But this is a district that will be close. So none of the other congressional districts should have close contests, but this one will be. This will receive a lot of attention throughout the state, and we'll be covering it pretty heavily.
Yeah, that's gone back and forth in recent years, so it's really a genuine kind of swing seat.
One of the few left, I think, yeah.
All right, let's take a look elsewhere on the ballot in the fall. What races are you guys most interested in following, or think are the sort of bellwether ones to watch?
I think there are a few. I'm interested in the Senator Schilling is being challenged by the guy that she has replaced, former Senator Kapanke, who was recalled. And, basically we kind of thought he was just off with his baseball team, but apparently he wants to come back to the Capitol. So that'll be interesting, just as kind of obviously some hard feelings from that one.
So the Assembly is not really in play because the Republicans control it by such a large gap, but the Senate is, and both sides realize this. And so there are a number of Senate races that are going to be highly competitive. There's that race. Then you'll have Senator Gudix didn't run for re-election, and so it's a race that not many people here know about in the Fond du Lac area. A guy named Dan Fine is going to be running in that race, and so you have that very competitive race, and then you have Tom Tiffany, who's going to be challenged, and so the Democrats will be pouring a lot of money in there. And in addition to that, you have the road builders who are very upset with Scott Walker right now, who says he won't raise funding and doesn't want to increase transportation spending. Road builders will be spending money in a lot of these different Senate races to try to get senators in who would support a gas tax increase.
And I think Republicans are worried about that Gudix seat because you'll remember they passed the law that basically seemed to be the Mark Harris law about having a position at the county while you're a sitting senator. Basically.
So Mark Harris will be the Democrat running against Dan Fine. That'll
and he's
actually
the Winnebago County executive, right? Is that
right? Winnebago County executive against Dan Fine, who's the Republican Party chairman up there. So that one's going to be probably the most competitive race and probably the one that most people will be watching.
Yeah, let's touch briefly on Scott Walker and what role do you think he plays in the fall? Because he really needs the Republicans to hang on to the Senate, right? If not, that's a totally different dynamic than his first.
He's becoming Mr. 38%. He's hanging at 38% approval rating and all of these things. So the question is, will these candidates want him to appear with him? But yeah, it's very important for him because, it's for more than 20 years he's had this position where he will not increase gas taxes. And the road builders are going to put up a fight to try to make sure that they get some money for construction throughout the state.
And somebody like Luther Olson, who's a more moderate Republican in a more moderate district, I don't know that he wants photos of him and Governor Walker campaigning together, probably like he doesn't really want photos of him and Trump hanging out together, because I don't think he wants to be associated in a moderate district with somebody who's seen as conservative and kind of unpopular.
All right, well, let's turn now to our winners and losers of the week. And Mary, we're going to have you go first, so let's get your winner of the week.
Okay, I would say Paul Ryan. Obviously he won by a huge margin. I think it was 84 to 16%, so 68 percentage points different. So I think also the poll showed yesterday that he's still very, very popular and pretty well respected, even by Democrats who, don't hate the guy. And most Republicans, it was like 80% approve of the job he's doing, I think.
And it's interesting, he had an approval rating of 54%. Obama had 53%. So
for when it was everybody, not just Republicans.
Everybody.
Right.
So Wisconsinites like
Obama.
Paul Ryan and Barack Obama equally.
We used to talk about the Scott Walker Obama voters. Now we've got the people who like Ryan and Obama together.
All right, and your loser of the week, Mary?
I would say Sarah Palin. Obviously when Paul Ryan hesitated to endorse Donald Trump, she went on TV, said that his career is over, he's going to be cantered. So it's unusual that you have the former Republican vice presidential nominee going after the guy who was the vice presidential nominee from the same party 4 years later. And obviously he was nowhere near being cantered, and it kind of makes her look out of touch, much like her appearance.
She didn't come in to support him. What did
she
really
not.
do? A tweet or two? Or what did she really do to help him?
She did tweets. She did some TV appearances. She sent some money from Sarah PAC. She did not do much, although it seems like she's maybe had some other issues.
She was the first one to get out there and signal that the Trump people were not happy with Paul Ryan. I think that was mostly the signal that this is our guy, that Paul Nealon is the Trump candidate. That was her main role, I think.
All right, and Dan, let's go to your winners and losers, starting with your winner.
As you know, I have a hard time narrowing winners and losers, so you can go online and see like my 10 or 11 winners and losers.
Dozens upon dozens of winners and losers.
Not dozens and dozens, like 8 or 9.
He's going to do loser and biggest loser.
Yeah, that's what I'll do. My winner is Chris Abele, who was on the ballot. In the past, he's had sort of this reverse Midas touch. When he endorses you, you usually end up in the political ash heap. But this time, just about every person that he endorsed and backed ended up winning, with one exception, and that was LaTanya Johnson beat his candidate, Thomas Harris, in the Senate seat. But he had a very good night. Plus, it's believed that he spent a lot of money, and he likes to spend money in dark money groups, and it looks like he might have spent some money with dark money groups that helped John Chisholm get reelected as district attorney.
All right, and your loser of the week.
Speaking of dark money groups, Craig Peterson runs the biggest and the one that spent the most money this time, called Milwaukeeans for Self-Governance. They spent a good $300,000 to $400,000 trying to help Verona Swanigan knock off John Chisholm for district attorney. In the end, Chisholm ended up winning by a 2-to-1 margin, so it wasn't even close. And I think I did the math. It works out to like the Milwaukeeans for Self-Governance spent almost $15 a vote on this race and ended up losing.
All right, let's turn now to our viewer questions. So the first one I'm going to throw to Mary. This is from Trump fan who says, "Is there a way to stop Paul Ryan now after his election?" And certainly, we don't think the Democrat who's running against him is going to stop him, right?
I guess that would be one option, would be to have Republicans who are unhappy with Paul Ryan, try to elect the Democrat. I don't know that they're going to do that. That could happen conceivably. I think that would be unlikely.
I think the way to stop him would be to give Democrats control of the House of Representatives and to turn him from Speaker to Minority Leader.
Right. Yeah. Well, even looking beyond this race, so it certainly strengthens his hand for going the next time. There isn't going to maybe less likely to be a cantering effort then, right? I mean, if this is what their efforts got on this time.
Yeah, it was not a very effective. I think it actually increased his popularity and seemed to make him more.
I think he's safer than ever here, but the question is, where does he go nationally? Because winning this election was the easiest thing. The toughest thing is what happens. He still endorsed Trump, and Trump has now endorsed him. And so no matter how much they dislike each other, they are attached at the hip for the next couple of months.
Although he can keep criticizing him every week or so, which
right.
could happen.
And he could, if Trump implodes, they could lose control of the House, which, I think that's the last thing in the world that Paul Ryan wants to be, is a minority leader.
All right, let's take this other question from Madtown, who says, and I'll ask you, Dan, when does special interest money dry up in the Feingold-Johnson race?
I think the special interest money starts drying up when if the gap gets incredibly large between the two. Once those people decide that it's not a good idea to keep on spending money on Ron Johnson, then they'll quit. But if the race is close, you'll see. And with the Koch brothers' money, they first pulled some $2 million in ads, but then they turned around and spent another $1 million. So I think they haven't quite made the decision to pull out of the race, as long as it's still somewhat competitive.
Yeah, it probably is determined, too, by what other races are competitive out there or not, and how critical is this one. But it seemingly is going to be a critical race for Republicans to maintain the Senate.
For them to keep control of the U.S. Senate.
All right, well, that'll take care of our show for this week. We hope you join us next week at the same time and location. And in the meantime, read Dan's 20, 30, 40 winners, losers, whatever he's got. Block out some time.
120.
It's really good if you can work through the
maybe print it out.
Winners
and read it in the paper.
So we'll see you next week.